My father noticed I was barely scraping by on a meager salary and hadn't found a serious girlfriend yet, so he took control of the situation and orchestrated a marriage for me with a high-powered executive. Sarah Sterling stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, rarely set foot in our home, and essentially bought my silence by tossing an unlimited Amex black car my way. She wanted me to stay out of her hair so she could spend her evenings undisturbed with her first love, Julian Thorne. I decided to be a cooperative husband, so I took that car to an elite penthouse club and ordered bottle service surrounded by 10 gorgeous models. Meanwhile, inside a lavish private suite at a high-end lounge, Sarah Sterling felt her phone buzz against the table. She gave the screen a detached glance before lifting her crystal wine glass for an unhurried sip of vintage Cabernet. The man sitting beside her, Julian Thorne, watched her with a gaze filled with both adoration and carefully practiced restraint. He noted that it was her wedding anniversary and asked what Morrison would think about her being here with him. Sarah's voice was like ice as she told him that he didn't need to concern himself with whatever Morrison might think. The moment the words left her lips, her phone buzzed again, and this time she actually picked it up to investigate. A notification informed her that $40,000 had been charged to her account, followed immediately by another alert for $420,000. We had been married for 2 long years, and this was the very first time I had ever touched her money. Sarah's finger traced the glowing screen for a moment while a cold, mocking smirk played across her lips. Julian pursed his lips and suggested that perhaps she ought to head home for the night. Before Sarah could even formulate a response, another notification popped up showing a charge for $54,000. For the first time in my entire life, I experienced the pure adrenaline rush of spending without ever glancing at a price tag. Being treated like royalty by the club staff felt incredible. 20 years of suppressed consumer desires finally erupted in an uncontrollable wave, causing Sarah's phone to vibrate with alerts every few minutes. She chose to ignore the phone for the rest of the meal, though it vibrated at least 7 or 8 more times before dinner concluded. She finally deigned to glance at the notifications only after settling the massive bill. Just as she was about to slide the device back in her purse, a call flashed on the screen from her best friend, Ashley Miller. Ashley's voice was thick with laughter that she was barely trying to suppress. She told Sarah that she had just spotted Morrison at the club, surrounded by 7 models at once. She joked that if Sarah didn't get down there immediately, her husband was going to make a total fool out of her in front of the whole city. Sarah let out a sharp laugh that was completely devoid of any real humor. She remarked that the idea of Morrison Harrison at a club with 7 women was utterly impossible. Ashley immediately sent over a photo via iMessage, insisting that Morrison was dressed so well tonight that she had barely recognized him at first. The man in the photo possessed sharp, handsome features and wore a tailored black suit that radiated an air of quiet sophistication. Ashley continued to tease her, asking if she could even recognize her own husband anymore. Sarah felt a sense of disbelief wash over her, because there was simply no way that suave man could be Morrison. Julian spoke up again, suggesting that Sarah should probably head home while he attended the film premiere on his own. Sarah simply tucked her phone away, seemingly unmoved by the news, and chose to accompany Julian to the theater instead. Julian later shared a post on Facebook to commemorate the premiere of his very first feature film. 20 minutes after that, Sarah received a new bank alert stating that Morrison Harrison had just deposited $1 million into his house account at the Vanguard. She could not sit still for another second, and with her face set in a cold mask of fury, she stormed out of the theater. Meanwhile, back in a private suite at the club, I was lounging on a plush velvet sofa while sipping from a $20,000 bottle of wine. 7 models with incredible figures provided impeccably attentive service as they surrounded me, gently massaging my shoulders and legs. I couldn't help but close my eyes in total bliss, feeling like I had finally found heaven on earth. It was surreal to think that just a short while ago, I was a broke guy earning peanuts who had literally dropped dead after an all-nighter spent reading a web novel. Now, I had woken up as the lovesick, obsessive side character from that very story, a man who just happened to share my name. The original Morrison Harrison had been born into one of the wealthiest families in the country, with the entire world at his fingertips. Despite his status, he had spent 5 years obsessively chasing after the female lead, Sarah Sterling, who never had eyes for anyone but her first love. Eventually, pressured by their powerful parents, Sarah had no choice but to enter into an arranged marriage with me. Following the wedding, she was rarely ever home, and on the few occasions she did show up, she treated the original Morrison like he was completely invisible. Unable to cope with the constant neglect, the original Morrison started acting out in desperate ways, which ultimately led to the total ruin of his family and his own miserable death. He truly fumbled a winning hand in life. I clicked my tongue in disapproval and shook my head at the memory of his pathetic choices. When the club manager approached me with another sales pitch, I waved my hand magnanimously and used Sarah's card to load another $1 million onto my account. When Sarah finally burst through the door of the suite, she found me stroking a model's thigh, looking thoroughly engrossed in the moment. I commented on how firm the model's legs were and asked how long she had been working on her fitness. The other girls eagerly vied for my attention, flaunting their own long legs and trying to draw my gaze. They all called out my name, asking me to look at them or feel how soft their skin was. I felt a literal rush to my head because the life of the rich and famous was absolutely incredible. Just as I was about to reach out to another girl, the door slammed open, followed by a frigid command. Sarah stood there and told everyone to get out immediately. I hadn't actually expected Sarah to show up and interrupt my fun, so I gave the waist of the innocent-looking model next to me a reluctant, playful squeeze. I told the girls to head out for now and promised to call for them again as soon as I was free. Sarah's face was glacial, looking cold enough to freeze hell itself. Soon, the suite fell silent, leaving just the two of us alone in the dim light. I sat back on the sofa and sized her up, realizing why the original Morrison had fallen for her the moment they met. Her beauty made all the models who had just scurried out seem plain in comparison. She stood there with her hands on her hips, exuding a charm that was utterly captivating and mouth-watering. While I was lost in admiration of her features, Sarah's furious voice snapped me back to reality. She demanded to know if I was really using her money to cheat on her, and asked if I thought she was afraid to take action against me. Sarah studied me with a cold, piercing expression. My features were sharp and well-defined, with a high bridge to my nose and a cool, detached look in my eyes. The top button of my shirt was undone, revealing a hint of my collarbone and a relaxed posture. She had never seen this version of Morrison before, a man who showed absolutely no panic at being caught in a compromising position. I seemed like a completely different person from the jealous, raving lunatic I had been just 2 short hours ago. I retorted with a tone of mock self-righteousness, pointing out that since we were married, her money was technically our money. I asked her why she was allowed to spend a fortune in wine and dining her first love while I wasn't allowed to pay for a little company of my own. I wasn't even slightly afraid of her. The novel had repeatedly described Sarah's intense disgust for the original Morrison, a revulsion so deep that even a single touch made her feel physically ill. In other words, for her to actually lay a hand on me would have been a form of self-torture for her. Sarah let out a humorless laugh and told me to cut the act, accusing me of running up her card just to force her to show up. I looked up at her and gently took her hand, pointing out that regardless of my motives, she had indeed come to see me. I asked her if leaving Julian to be here meant that I was actually more important to her than he was. Sarah's face instantly grew even colder as she warned me not to push my luck. She stated firmly that if she ever saw me acting like this again, our marriage would be over. With that, she flung my hand away in disgust and immediately grabbed a napkin to wipe her own palm. It was just as the book had described. She was genuinely repulsed by any physical contact with me. I almost snickered as I rubbed my chin, leaning back on the sofa and crossing my legs comfortably. I told her that since she wouldn't even let me touch her, I had been over this marriage for a long time. I challenged her to slap the divorce papers on the table right then and there, swearing that if I hesitated to sign for even a second, my name wasn't Morrison Harrison. Sarah froze for a moment, glancing at me as a slow, mocking smile spread across her lips. She asked if I was actually sure about a divorce. After all the trouble the original Morrison had gone through to marry her, and considering he was acting obsessed just hours ago, hearing him ask for a divorce seemed like the biggest joke she had ever heard. My gaze lingered on her face for a moment before traveling down to her long, elegant legs. I gave her an ultimatum. Either she let me touch her, or we were getting a divorce. Sarah's face darkened instantly as she pulled out her phone and called her assistant, ordering a divorce agreement to be drafted and delivered to the house first thing in the morning. I picked up my unfinished drink and downed the rest, so as not to waste good wine, then set the glass down and stood up. I told her it was her choice and not to regret it later. Sarah's elegant brows furrowed in confusion, but before she could say a word, I ignored her completely and walked out of the suite. Sarah stood there stunned, becoming increasingly convinced that I was simply drunk. In her mind, that was the only explanation for why I was acting so out of character and daring to mention divorce. When I finally made it back to the house, I went straight upstairs to my own room without a word. Sarah watched the back of Morrison Harrison, who hadn't given her so much as a second glance, and only snapped out of her daze after I had disappeared from view. She sat down on the sofa with the image of the man who wanted to divorce her flashing in her mind, and she let out a cold, sharp laugh. She couldn't wait to see the look on my face when she slammed those divorce papers down in front of me the next morning. With that thought in mind, Sarah headed upstairs and paused at my door. She stopped in her tracks when she heard my voice echoing from inside, singing loudly and off-key. I was belting out a song about having a wonderful feeling and everything going my way. Sarah listened to my drunken caterwauling and was about to burst in to shut me up, only to realize that the door was locked firmly from the inside. The man who usually spent every waking moment scheming to get into her bed had actually locked his door against her for once. My singing continued to pour out into the hallway as I belted out lyrics about believing I could fly and touch the sky. Realizing that my drunken episode was in full swing, Sarah finally turned and walked away in irritation. I was currently occupying the master suite because Sarah had refused to share a bed with the original Morrison, moving into a guest room and leaving this massive space entirely to him. I looked around the huge, luxurious room with its closet overflowing with designer labels and priceless watches, and I just kept singing happily. I took a long, relaxing soak in the two-person jacuzzi tub and finally sank into the impossibly soft king-size bed. It felt like I was living in a dream that was almost too good to be true. The next morning, when Sarah came downstairs, she was surprised to find the dining table completely bare. There was no breakfast waiting for her like there usually was, and I wasn't there watching her with pathetic puppy dog eyes. She glanced up at my closed bedroom door and couldn't help but smirk to herself. She figured I had finally sobered up and was now too terrified to face her, hiding in my room like a coward. Remembering my bold talk about wanting a divorce the night before, she sneered and tossed the legal agreement onto the coffee table before leaving for the office. I had never slept in such a comfortable bed in my entire life, so I didn't wake up until well past noon. Seeing that I was still in that opulent bedroom, I finally confirmed for good that I had definitely transmigrated into the novel. I ran through the plot of the book in my head again, remembering that our marriage was supposed to last less than 3 years. That meant that in less than a year, Sarah would bankrupt my family and kick me out on the street with absolutely nothing. The novel only glossed over the details of the business war, so I had no idea what specific methods she would use to destroy us. This life of luxury was way too good to give up, and there was no way I was going to let my family go bankrupt this time. I got up, got dressed, and headed downstairs. The moment I spotted the divorce agreement sitting on the coffee table, I grabbed a pen and signed my name without hesitation. To hesitate for even a second would have been disrespectful to the very concept of my newfound freedom. I took Sarah's black card out of my pocket and placed it right on top of the signed papers. After gathering the original Morrison's most important belongings, I headed straight back to the Harrison family estate. The moment my mom saw me, she dropped what she was doing and rushed over in a panic. She asked why I was home at such an hour and if Sarah had finally kicked me out. I just smiled at her and shook my head, assuring her that wasn't the case at all. She clearly didn't believe me, because usually at this time of day, I would be busy delivering a homemade lunch to Sarah's office. I never used to have time to even think about my own family. Mom took my hand and asked why I hadn't called ahead so she could have the staff prepare all my favorite dishes. She complimented my new haircut and told me how wonderful I looked in my outfit. My mom's eyes were filled with pure affection as she spoke to me. She immediately called for Mrs. Miller, our housekeeper, to whip up a few of my favorite meals, her every gesture radiating pure joy at having her son home. She told me she was going to call my father and tell him to come home for lunch. Before I could even think to stop her, she had already dialed his number. I took the opportunity to look around the beautiful estate, and my mood lifted with every glance. As soon as Mom hung up, she started fussing over me again, asking if I was really doing okay. It was obvious she had been worried sick about me ever since the original Morrison had married Sarah. She told me that if anything was wrong, I had to tell her and my father because they would always be there for me. Looking at this beautiful, warm woman and remembering her tragic fate in the novel, I couldn't stop myself from stepping forward and pulling her into a tight hug. I silently vowed to rewrite the ending for both her and my father. My mom's body stiffened for a second in surprise because it had been years since her son had hugged her like this. I told her I was sorry for making her worry so much over the past few years and promised it wouldn't happen again. Hearing those words, her eyes instantly welled up with tears of relief. Since the wedding, I had rarely come home, and even when I did, the conversation was always centered on Sarah. Mom had warned me that you can't force someone to love you, but I had insisted that I would marry no one else but Sarah. I was their only child and the absolute apple of their eye, so when I demanded to marry her, they had eventually given in. After the wedding, she had watched me live unhappily, seeing my pride and spirit fade away bit by bit. She saw my entire world shrink until it seemed to contain nothing but Sarah, and she watched me lose my sense of right and wrong. As a mother, it had completely broken her heart to see me like that. I heard the sob in her voice and saw the tears filling her red eyes. I reached up to gently wipe them away and gave her a reassuring smile. I told her to look at me and asked if she could see that I was finally doing just fine. My mom looked at me, sensing that something was fundamentally different this time and that I was finally acting like my old self again. By the time lunch was ready, my father had returned home, and he brought Elena Vance with him. Elena was the daughter of my father's best friend and was 3 years older than me. After her parents passed away, she had lived with her grandmother, but it was too difficult for an elderly woman to raise a child alone. The Harrison family had taken her in, raising her as one of our own and supported her all the way through college. She had started working at Harrison Holdings while she was still in college and worked her way up to becoming a senior executive right after graduation. I stole a quick glance at her, only to find that she was already watching me intently. In the novel, the original Morrison had always treated her like an older sister. While he was busy chasing Sarah, he constantly told Elena how much he loved her and begged for her help in winning Sarah over. In front of him, she always played the part of the perfect older sister, being doting, protective, and helpful without ever crossing the line. Even the readers of the novel never suspected her true feelings until the very end of the story. After Sarah and I got divorced in the book, Elena went looking for me, only to find me at the scene of a fatal car crash. She held my trembling, blood-soaked body as her eyes instantly turned red with grief. She kept wiping the blood from my lips, her voice sounding completely numb from the shock. She told me that she regretted everything and that she should have stopped the two of us from getting married back then. The deep love in Elena's eyes was like a dense fog that she no longer wished to conceal. She wanted me to know in my final moments that she had loved me for many, many years. She tried desperately to hold on to me, but it was no use, and she could only watch as my life slipped away before her very eyes. It was at that exact moment in the story that I had developed a complicated love-hate relationship with her character. Just then, my mom smiled and greeted her, noting that Elena was joining us for lunch too. I followed suit and gave her a casual wave. Elena looked at me with a hint of fond indulgence in her voice, asking if I wasn't supposed to be busy delivering lunch to Sarah, as usual. She asked what had made me decide to grace them with my presence for once. I just smiled and shook my head, telling her it was too hot outside and that Sarah had said it was too much trouble, so she told me to stop coming. The moment those words left my mouth, not just Elena, but my parents as well turned to stare at me in obvious disbelief. As I expected, the people who cared about me most couldn't fathom that Sarah would ever say anything kind to me. Noticing their stunned expressions, I quickly turned to Elena to change the subject. I asked her how things were going at the office lately. She gave me a curious look and mentioned that they were in negotiations for several major projects that could take the company to the next level. I looked at her with a puzzled expression, asking what would happen if the cash flow got tight from taking on too many projects at once. I worried aloud about what would happen if the capital chain broke while the Sterling family just stood by and watched us fail. Elena just smiled confidently and said the company could handle it. I shook my head and looked at her seriously, telling her that I didn't think the market was stable enough right now. I argued that the most important thing for the company should be maintaining stability and ensuring we had enough cash flow to handle any potential risks. I couldn't be too explicit about my knowledge of the future, so this was the only way I could warn her. Elena looked at me with a hint of scrutiny in her eyes, asking since when I had become so interested in the family business. I realized my mistake immediately because the original Morrison never gave a damn about the company. I rubbed my chin and glanced at her, knowing I had to press on despite her suspicion. I told her that she and my father needed to be extremely careful with these projects and seriously consider the potential fallout. Elena stared at me, tried to read my expression, and asked if I had heard something from Sarah. She wondered if I was trying to get our family to back off just so Sarah could swoop in and take the project for herself. The original lovesick Morrison had often pushed our family to help the Sterling Group, so it was only natural for her to suspect my motives now. I shook my head and told her no, explaining that I just kept having this recurring nightmare about the company going bankrupt, and it was making me uneasy. Elena fell silent, but it was clear that she didn't fully buy my explanation. I hesitated for a moment, then glanced at my parents across the room before leaning in close to her and cupping my hand around my mouth. I whispered that I had actually overheard Sarah saying she wanted to ruin the Harrison family. I pulled back and noticed that the tips of Elena's ears had turned red, which was an unexpected reaction. I awkwardly pretended not to notice her fluster and lower my voice further. I told her I was afraid it would be too much for my mom and dad to handle, so I couldn't tell them directly. I admitted that I didn't know the first thing about business, so I was counting on her to handle it. Elena leaned back against the sofa, nonchalantly fiddling with her ear while she watched me carefully. She then asked me what my own plans were for the future. Before I could answer, my mom came over to call us all to the dining room for lunch. Looking at the feast spread across the table, my mood soared instantly. My mom served me a piece of fish, telling me to eat up because I'd gotten far too thin. I looked at all the amazing food and swallowed hard, explaining that it was because I hadn't had a real home-cooked meal in ages. I told her that after a few days at home, I was sure I would put the weight right back on. Hearing this, my mom happily kept piling more food onto my plate. She told me that if I wanted home-cooked meals, she would have them delivered to me every single day. I waved my hand and told her there was no need because I was planning on living at home from now on. For a moment, everyone at the table froze and just stared at me in shock. I put down my utensils and looked at them with a serious expression. I told my mom, my dad, and Elena that I was going to divorce Sarah. I explained that I used to think I could make her love me if I tried hard enough. But I finally realized that love isn't something you can force. I told them I didn't want to love her anymore and just wanted to come home to be with all of them. I said it with an air of nonchalance, showing no trace of sadness or reluctance at all. However, in the eyes of my family, the original Morrison's feelings for Sarah were too deeply ingrained to be gone so quickly. My parents looked at me, clearly not believing that I could just let her go that easily. I asked why everyone was so quiet and joked about whether they thought I was a loser for coming home to leech off them. At that, my mom finally snapped out of her daze. Her face broke into a huge, genuine smile as she told me of course not, and that she was just so happy I was coming home. My dad picked up his phone and immediately transferred another $10 million to my account. He told me to come home whenever I wanted, noting that this family could afford to support me for 10 lifetimes. Looking at my parents, I felt a lump in my throat from their unconditional support. In the novel, after the Harrison family went bankrupt, the shock of discovering his own daughter-in-law was the mastermind caused my father to have a stroke, leaving him in a vegetative state. Unable to cope with the double blow, my mother had fallen into a deep depression and eventually took her own life in the original story. We had to change all of that no matter what. I served them some food in return, and just as I was setting my things down, Elena's soft voice piped up, asking what about her. Elena was looking at me with a playful pout on her face, as if she were competing with my parents for my attention. I glanced at her with a smile and placed a piece of meat on her plate. Meanwhile, over at Sterling Group, Sarah's assistant walked into the office with a stack of documents. The assistant asked if Morrison wasn't delivering her lunch today. Sarah glanced at her watch and realized that by this time, I would have normally already arrived. She assumed I was so terrified of her divorcing me that I didn't even dare to show my face with food anymore. She muttered that I was pathetic and gave her assistant a cool, questioning look. She asked if the assistant had become addicted to my cooking and offered mockingly to call and ask me for her. The assistant quickly shook her head, insisting she was just making a casual observation. The truth was that the assistant always ended up eating the lunch I brought, and she had grown quite used to it. Finally, her curiosity got the better of her, and she remarked that this was the very first time Morrison hadn't shown up. Noticing her boss's growing displeasure, the assistant quickly grabbed the signed documents and fled the room. For once, Sarah had a work day completely uninterrupted by my presence. However, after work, the image of last night's Morrison, dressed in that sharp suit and demanding a divorce with eyes devoid of affection, kept replaying in her mind. Sarah sneered at the memory and headed straight for a bar to clear her head. The moment she entered the private suite, all of her friends turned to look at her in unison. She sat down on the sofa, and when they continued to stare at her, her expression soured instantly. She snapped at them, asking what they were all staring at. Her best friend, Ashley, came over and tentatively asked where her shadow was and why Morrison wasn't with her. Sarah shot them a cold glare, reminding them that they were the ones who always complained about him following her around. She asked if this wasn't exactly what they wanted now that he was gone. Nicole, reading the tension in the room, poured Sarah a drink and admitted they were just worried. She joked that they were afraid that now that he wasn't chasing her, she would suddenly start wanting him back. As Sarah's best friends, they knew better than anyone that wherever she went, Morrison was sure to follow. The Morrison they knew would never go to a club to order models, and he certainly wouldn't leave Sarah on her own to go on a solo trip to Miami. Sarah's face went frigid, and she told them that if they weren't going to use their eyes properly, they might as well donate them. Ashley laughed it off, saying that as long as Sarah didn't care, it was all good. She then called for a toast to celebrate Sarah's temporary freedom from her supposed suffering. Sarah picked up her glass and drank, completely ignoring the subtext of their conversation. After a few more rounds of drinks, Nicole held up her phone to show everyone something. She remarked that she knew Morrison forcing her in a marriage had been a huge blow to Sarah's pride. She admitted that with his looks and his family's wealth, he was more than a match for her. She then asked how on earth Sarah had managed to keep him from touching her for 2 whole years. Back when I only had eyes for Sarah, I had made sure to get the iMessage contacts of all her friends so they would see my Facebook updates. My feed used to be a virtual shrine to Sarah, filled with couple photos to stake my claim and sappy love poems dedicated to her. I knew Sarah had muted my feed, so whenever I posted one of my long essays, her friends would screenshot it and send it to their group chat just to make fun of her. But just 2 hours ago, they had discovered that I had deleted every single post about Sarah from my Facebook profile. I had checked in at Miami and just posted a 9-photo grid of myself in swim trunks, watching the sunset on the beach. The caption read that I was enjoying the most beautiful view with the person who loves me most. Noticing everyone staring intently at their phones, Sarah glanced over and saw the photo of me, smiling happily on the beach. Madison stared at her own screen and remarked that it felt like Morrison had changed completely all of a sudden. Ashley nodded in agreement, noting that I actually looked quite handsome in the photos. Nicole smiled and suggested that this is what a man looks like when he is finally over someone. With a sudden crash, Sarah slammed her wine glass onto the floor, her beautiful face turning to ice. Sarah glared at her friends, asking if something was wrong with them since they were all glued to their phones talking about Morrison Harrison. With that final outburst, she stormed out of the suite and slammed the door behind her. Ashley looked completely bewildered, wondering why Sarah was so furious if she supposedly didn't care. Madison chuckled and asked if the others thought she was actually starting to fall for him. Nicole narrowed her eyes and admitted that while she didn't know about Sarah, she was starting to find him attractive herself. Ashley and Madison both stared at her, telling her she had to be kidding. Back in her car, Sarah took out her phone, opened her iMessage, and pulled up my Facebook profile. Only then did she see for herself that I had gone on a trip to Miami. In the photos, my eyes were crinkled with laughter and practically glowing. Whether it was a profile shot or a direct look at the camera, every single pose radiated pure joy. It was as if my eyes held all the beauty in the world at that moment. She wondered if this was really Morrison Harrison, the same spoiled rich kid whose eyes used to hold nothing but adoration for her or rage toward everyone else. She told herself that a person couldn't change that drastically overnight, especially a man who loved to throw irrational tantrums. Sarah refused to believe that the man in the photos was the real me. She thought that others might be fooled, but she knew better. She convinced herself that this was just my way of avoiding the divorce conversation and that posting pictures on Facebook was another pathetic attempt to get her attention. And yet, even believing she knew my motive, she found herself captivated by these uncharacteristically cheerful photos. Meanwhile, I was enjoying the first real vacation of my life. Miami had always been the #1 place I wanted to visit back in my old life. The cool breeze, the seafood feasts, and the nighttime ocean views while I ate all combined to give me one single thought: life is truly beautiful. In my past life, I was always broke and never had the chance to experience anything like this. There had been nothing in my life worth remembering back then. But now, I felt like there were so many things worth capturing, from the food and the scenery to the genuine love of my family. The next morning, I mentioned that I wanted to try scuba diving, so my mom hired a beautiful private instructor for me. She took me out on the water. I spent the day weaving through coral reefs and swimming with schools of fish, feeling completely relaxed and happy. Back in her office at Sterling Group, Sarah took a call from her mother amidst her busy schedule. Her mother asked why Morrison was on a trip with another woman, and if the two of them had gotten into a fight. Sarah frowned and said no, but her mother's tone remained stern. She argued that if they hadn't fought, he wouldn't be getting that close to another woman and deliberately posting it on Facebook for the world to see. Sarah pulled up my profile and saw the video I had shared just a few minutes earlier. The caption read that it was my first time scuba diving and that words couldn't describe how happy I was. In the video, a woman was with me, sometimes grabbing my arm or steadying me, and her actions looked quite intimate. You couldn't see her face clearly through all the diving gear, but it was obvious she had an amazing body. In the comments section, our mutual friends from college were already chiming in with their thoughts. People were joking that we should get a room and that we looked great together. Ashley, who was also in our graduating class, saw the post and realized that everyone was mistakenly assuming the woman in the video was Sarah. She tagged Sarah in their group chat to make sure she saw it. Madison chuckled, noting that even if she filed for divorce, there was still a 30-day cooling-off period, yet Morrison seemed a little impatient to move on. Nicole nodded, saying you couldn't really blame him since he was a young, hot-blooded guy who had reached his limit. Their chat was suddenly interrupted by a system notification stating that Sarah Sterling had left the group. She muttered to herself that they were all a bunch of idiots. Sarah remained confident that Morrison wouldn't actually go through with a divorce because his entire social media presence had always been for her benefit. He hadn't contacted her once since yesterday, yet his Facebook was being updated constantly. He was posting so frequently that it was obviously intended for her to see. She believed that posting the diving video was just like ordering those models at the club, a calculated ploy to get her attention. She thought I was trying to make her feel a sense of urgency, so she would reach out to him, giving him an easy way out of this divorce nonsense. She snorted, thinking men were so predictable. She felt that Morrison really overestimated his own importance in her life. Him not bothering her was exactly what she wanted, so she tossed her phone aside and went back to work. However, the image of this new, changed Morrison kept flashing in her mind, leaving her feeling inexplicably agitated. She called her assistant and had her schedule packed solid with work to stay distracted. That evening, she took Julian Thorne to a birthday gala for the daughter of the Harrison family's rivals. Soon, the hashtag about Sarah Sterling attending the gala with Julian Thorne was trending on Twitter. Sarah often brought Julian to formal events, but her lavish, sensational wedding to Morrison Harrison, which had been live-streamed, was still fresh in the public's memory. Besides, reporters couldn't afford to offend either the Sterling or the Harrison families. As a result, no one dared to speculate openly about their private lives in the press. However, in the past, every time Morrison saw one of these trending topics, he would assume Julian was trying to seduce Sarah and would go looking for trouble, often getting physical. When Sarah got back to her hotel suite and saw the trending topic, images of Morrison's past jealous rages and his current happy vacation photos flashed alternately in her mind. She felt a strange flicker of anticipation about what he might do. She took a shower and went to bed for the night. Meanwhile, I had spent my morning diving and the afternoon surfing the waves. I couldn't have been happier as I lay in bed after a shower, idly scrolling through my phone. I saw that the original Morrison's informant had sent me a link to the trending Twitter topic about Sarah and Julian. I gave a quick glance and saw them in the same photo, but there was no actual gossip to be found. I was actually getting anxious on their behalf, wishing they would just get together already. I was about to tell the informant that I wasn't interested in news about Sarah anymore when a video call from Elena came through. She asked if I was having fun, and I nodded, telling her it was great. Elena had clearly just gotten out of the shower and was still drying her hair with a towel. Fresh from the steam, her eyes held an extra allure, her skin looked translucent and smooth, and her lips were a natural, dewy red. I had to fight to keep my composure while looking at her. Elena looked at me and mumbled that she wanted to go on vacation too. I shot her a look and told her to focus on work, reminding her that my warning about the Sterlings turning on us wasn't a joke. I told her she needed to be prepared because the whole company was counting on her. Elena paused what she was doing and looked straight at me, asking if I wasn't afraid she was just like Sarah plotting to take over the company. I smiled and shook my head, telling her that I trusted her completely. Elena looked at me with her beautiful eyes warming up. I hadn't realized that such a simple statement would have such an effect on her. I quickly tried to end the conversation, noting that it was getting late and we both needed sleep. She gave me a hopeful look and reminded me not to forget to bring her back a souvenir. Lying in bed, I thought about the years of unrequited love Elena had felt for the original Morrison and decided I should grant her small request. The next day, Sarah woke up and checked her phone only to see the topic was still trending, yet Morrison still hadn't contacted her. He hadn't bothered Julian either, which was out of character. She couldn't resist opening my Facebook profile again and saw that I had posted a new update just 5 minutes ago. It was a video of me giving my mom a tour on a rented scooter. In the video, my handsome face was so alive with joy that I looked like a walking advertisement for happiness, completely overshadowing the beautiful scenery around us. Sarah was stunned to see that Morrison hadn't rushed back and was still enjoying his vacation. If I had time to post on Facebook, there was no way I hadn't seen the trending topic about her and Julian. But not only had I not come back, I actually seemed even happier than before. Sarah let out a laugh of pure frustration and tossed her phone aside. She thought I had finally grown a spine and wanted to see just how long I could keep it up. Sarah's day was packed from morning until night, and when she finally got back to her hotel, she collapsed onto the sofa in exhaustion. While staring at the warm glow of the lamp, the image of me happily riding that scooter flashed through her mind. She couldn't help but pull out her phone to check my Facebook again. I had posted another update just a few hours ago. The caption read that there was no one quite like a mother. The 9-photo grid was filled with pictures of me eating various local snacks or showing off the little souvenirs I'd bought. The center of the grid was a heartwarming photo of me and my mom. In the comments, my dad had jokingly asked if he wasn't any good. I quickly replied that Dad was good too. Seeing this, Elena chimed in, teasing that I was biased and asking what about her. I replied with a playful sigh that Elena was the best in the entire world. Meanwhile, Sarah had been feeling a strange tightness in her chest for the past few days. It had been 3 full days since I had last tried to see her or contact her, and with each passing day, I seemed to be getting happier without her. Seeing me so happy made her feel sick, as if she had swallowed a fly. Just then, her phone buzzed, and she saw it was a message from me. The tightness in her chest suddenly vanished. She thought I had finally cracked, and for the first time ever, she opened our iMessage chat with a flicker of anticipation. But my words were ice cold, reminding her that it had been days since I signed the divorce papers and asking when we were going to finalize the paperwork. Sarah stared at the text, her beautiful eyes widening in shock as her grip on the phone tightened. After a long moment of silence, she got up and drove straight back to our house. The house, which always used to be lit up waiting for her no matter how late she returned, was now completely dark. It was illuminated only by the lonely, rhythmic glow of the street lights outside. She switched on the foyer light and stepped inside, finding the house empty and devoid of the figure that was always there waiting for her. On the coffee table, her black card sat right on top of the signed divorce agreement. She picked up the papers and opened them, seeing the handwritten signature of Morrison Harrison written in a stark, bold hand. The paper crumpled in her grip as a storm of emotions churned within her. Morrison Harrison, the man who was fighting over her and throwing jealous fits just a few days ago, actually wanted to divorce her now. She wondered how that was even possible. Sarah let out a cold, disbelieving laugh. Meanwhile, back at the Harrison estate, my mom was unpacking bags of souvenirs from my trip and handing them out to the household staff. She told them that I had said these were all delicious and brought them back for everyone to try. The staff accepted the gifts with happy thanks, and a warm, joyful atmosphere filled the house. My dad was having his after-dinner tea, and Elena was on a work call in the study. The house was large, but it felt warm and full of life, not empty at all. I held my phone, noticing that Sarah still hadn't replied, and made a mental note to call her in a little bit. Elena sat down next to me and asked where her souvenir was. I looked up and met her clear eyes, which held a flicker of hopeful expectation. Seeing her through the lens of her long-held affection, it was hard not to feel a sense of partiality towards her. I got up, opened my suitcase, and took out 2 small nightlights. One was crafted from a beautiful shell, and I asked her which one she wanted. Elena looked at them both and asked who the other one was for. I didn't call out her little game and simply told her it was for me. Elena broke into a radiant smile, picking up the shell night light and examining it closely. My mom, having finished handing out the other gifts, saw the light in her hand and mentioned that I had actually made that one myself. At that, Elena's head snapped up and she looked right at me in shock. The delighted surprise in her eyes was impossible to conceal. She asked if I really made it, knowing that the original Morrison had only ever made handmade gifts for Sarah. After years of secret adoration, this was the first time she had ever received something handmade from me. I could only imagine the joy she was feeling. I put on a stern face and asked if she didn't like it, telling her to give it back if that was the case. Elena immediately shook her head and insisted that she loved it. She just kept looking at me, and I could feel the deep, restrained affection in her gaze, a look so alluring that I could barely handle it. I stood up with my phone in hand and told them I was tired and going to my room to rest. Once I was back in my room, I checked my phone and saw that Sarah had finally replied, telling me to meet her at City Hall at 9 tomorrow morning. In the novel, Sarah had bankrupted the Harrison family before forcing me into a divorce where I walked away with nothing. I wondered if divorcing now, ahead of schedule, meant that I could actually change my family's fate. My mood soared, and I was so excited that I set an alarm, terrified that I might oversleep the next day. I ended up waking up even before my alarm, thinking about my impending freedom. I took extra care to dress well for the occasion. When I went downstairs, my dad had already left for work, and my mom was in the sunroom trimming flowers she had picked from the garden. She saw me and called me over to have some breakfast. I was in a hurry, so I made an excuse and left, planning to surprise them with the news only after the divorce was final. The original Morrison had a driver's license, but I personally didn't know how to drive yet. I only knew how to ride an electric scooter because I had been too poor in my past life to even think about getting a license. The car I had called arrived at City Hall at 8:50. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah immediately. I told her I was there and asked when she would arrive. She replied that she would be there soon. Apparently, soon meant making me wait under a tree until 9:30. I was so mad that I spent the time cursing her and all her ancestors before I finally saw her car pull up. I rushed forward eagerly to meet her. Sarah watched me through the car window, wondering why I seemed to be getting more handsome as I walked toward her. Backlit by the morning sun, I seemed to glow, eclipsing everything around me. I stopped and knocked on her window, and only then did Sarah seem to snap out of her daze and open the car door. She got out, and our eyes met, but my gaze held no trace of her and no hint of sadness. There was only a happy, slightly unfamiliar smile on my face, which was not at all what she had expected to see. I gave her a brief, indifferent glance and told her let's go. I turned and walked toward the entrance of City Hall with light, eager steps. It was only at that exact moment that Sarah was finally convinced that I really wanted a divorce. She watched me walk away, the memory of being forced into this marriage flashing vividly in her mind. It had been over 2 years, but the memory was still as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. Being forced to marry me had been a total humiliation for her, and from the moment we were wed, she had been plotting the day she would get her revenge. But that day hadn't come yet, and now I was the one asking for a divorce. I walked a few steps and then noticed she was still standing by the car. I frowned and walked back to her, asking what was wrong. Her silence gave me a very bad feeling. I asked if she had actually forgotten her ID, pointing out the absurdity of coming to a divorce appointment without it. I tried to keep my cool and told her to just have someone bring it over quickly. Sarah just stared at me with a cold expression, saying absolutely nothing. I was exasperated and told her to make the call, asking why she was just staring at me. Only then did Sarah lower her gaze, glancing at her watch before finally deigning to speak. She told me she had a meeting at 10 and that we would have to deal with the divorce some other time. I frowned and argued that since we were already here, we shouldn't have to make another trip. I suggested she just postpone the meeting, saying it wouldn't kill her to be a little late after we filed the papers. I only said that because in the novel, Sarah was always postponing meetings for Julian, so I knew they couldn't be that important. But the moment the words left my mouth, her expression shifted, and she looked at me as if I had committed some unforgivable sin. Her face turned absolutely glacial. She asked if I really thought my personal affairs were the most important thing in the world, or if the livelihoods of thousands of employees were less important than my divorce. She told me I thought far too highly of myself. I was stunned into silence for a few seconds by her sudden tirade. What a hypocrite she was, considering it was perfectly fine for Julian to make her postpone meetings. But when I suggested it, suddenly the livelihoods of her employees were at stake. I also wondered if this divorce was just my business, since she was clearly a part of it too. Sarah didn't even give me time to respond before she turned around and walked away. So much for getting a divorce today. She was the one who showed up late without her ID, so I should have been the angry one. Yet she was the one who stormed off and slammed her car door. I was so angry I could practically spit. I already had the Facebook post celebrating my new single life all planned out, not to mention my plans for a big night on the town. Instead, I went to a convenience store, bought an armful of junk food, and headed over to Harrison Holdings. When Sarah returned from her meeting, she found me sitting on her office sofa, playing a game on my phone with a spicy jerky stick hanging out of my mouth. The whole office reeked of the snack. The coffee table was covered in junk food, the kind of stuff the old Morrison would never have touched. Sarah frowned in disgust and asked me what I was doing there. I didn't even look up from my phone as I chewed on my jerky, telling her simply that I was waiting for her. Sarah paused and gave me a long look before walking over to her desk and sitting down. She asked what I was waiting for her for. Seeing me eating junk food and playing games on my phone without any of the airs of a wealthy heir, she felt like this Morrison was a complete stranger to her. I finally paused my game and looked up at her. I pointed out that we didn't get the divorce finalized this morning, so I figured I would wait here until she was done so we could go then. Sarah gave me a cold stare and said she was busy for the rest of the day. I gave her a skeptical look and asked her exactly when she would be free. Sarah picked up a file from her desk and said she would contact me when she had time. I had a strong feeling that she was starting to back out. If she really wanted a divorce, I didn't understand how she couldn't find the time. Why would she change her mind when she hated the original Morrison so much? A divorce should have been a relief for her. I wondered if she just hadn't had her fill of torturing me yet. Although the novel never explicitly stated it, her attitude towards the original Morrison was clearly a form of revenge for the forced marriage. The more he wanted her love, the more she had made him suffer the pain of wanting something he could never have. Now that I was the one wanting a divorce, I wondered if she was going to make me suffer the pain of not being able to get one. I shot to my feet, absolutely furious. I asked Sarah Sterling if she actually wanted this divorce or not. I told her I was giving her 3 days, and if she didn't come with me to finalize it by then, I would sue for divorce. I told her that this wasn't a negotiation, but a notification. With that, I grabbed my bag of snacks and turned to leave. Just then, the office door opened and Julian Thorne walked in. The moment he saw me, a look of fear flashed in his eyes, and he asked if he was interrupting something. Julian was about to back out, but Sarah waved him in, telling him his timing was perfect. Julian was the male lead of the novel, a character with a classic tragic backstory. His father had been a gambling addict, and his mother was chronically ill. His father racked up huge debts while Julian was still in high school. He had to start working to support them. Sarah had eventually saved him, signing him to her entertainment company and turning him into a household name. As the novel's hero, he was kind, hardworking, and morally upright. He had fallen for Sarah the moment she helped him, but he always felt he wasn't good enough for her, so he never confessed his feelings. Instead, he dedicated himself to becoming a man worthy of her. After Sarah was forced into marriage, Julian, despite his love for her, stuck to his principles and refused to be a homewrecker, maintaining a platonic distance between them. The novel was told mostly from Julian's and the original Morrison's perspectives, with Sarah's feelings for Julian shown through her actions. In the part one had read, they still hadn't confessed, so their mutual, restrained pining had earned endless sympathy and anticipation from the readers. Meanwhile, everyone was constantly begging for the villain, the original Morrison, to be written out of the story. I was already on my way out. I glanced from Sarah to Julian and then beat a hasty retreat with a genuine smile on my face. I told them to take their time and that I wouldn't disturb them. As I passed Julian, I could feel him flinch away from me in fear. I couldn't blame him for being scared since the original Morrison had always seen him as the man trying to destroy his marriage. Morrison had made a point of harassing him at every opportunity, even trying to have him beaten up a few times. Now, try clean up my image. I walked out of the office and even thoughtfully closed the door behind me. Julian watched me go, looking completely bewildered, and then looked back at Sarah. He saw her staring at the closed door with an expression colder than he had ever seen before. As Julian approached with a bag of souvenirs he had brought for her, he noticed that the fountain pen in Sarah's hand had scribbled a mess all over the document in front of her. She looked up from the paper, her gaze clearing as she asked what brought him there. Julian smiled and placed the bag on her desk, explaining there were some specialties from his trip that he thought she would like. He also thanked her for helping him find that specialist for his mother. He then looked at her with eyes full of restrained emotion and asked if she and Morrison were really getting a divorce. Meanwhile, I came out with my snacks and ran right into Sarah's assistant, who was on her way in with a file for Sarah to sign. I stuck my arm out, blocking her way. I told her that her boss was in an important meeting right now and to wait until Julian Thorne came out before going in. The assistant looked from the closed office door to me, looking completely baffled. Julian Thorne was in there, and Morrison wasn't throwing a jealous fit. He was just standing there calmly. I opened my bag of jerky and offered her some, and the assistant, a self-proclaimed foodie, couldn't resist taking a piece. I chuckled as she thanked me and told her to try to be a little more perceptive from now on. I advised her not to go in and disturb them whenever Julian Thorne came to see Sarah. The assistant just nodded without saying a word. I left her with that and walked away, knowing that helping them get together was ultimately helping myself. The sooner they couldn't resist their feelings for each other, the sooner Sarah would finalize the divorce with me. After all, suing for divorce required proof that the marriage had irretrievably broken down, which sounded like a huge hassle I wanted to avoid. The assistant waited until Julian left before going in with her file. As Sarah signed it, the assistant couldn't help but gossip, telling her she would never guess what Morrison had just said. Sarah glanced up at her as the assistant continued, explaining that I had told her she could only come in after Julian left. She added that I had instructed her not to disturb them whenever Julian came to see her from now on. Sarah threw a file at her and asked if I was the one paying her salary. The assistant caught the file and asked if she didn't think Morrison had changed, noting that he didn't seem jealous anymore. She even suggested it was almost like he was trying to set her up with Julian. A chilling smile touched Sarah's lips as she asked the assistant if she had too much free time on her hands lately. The assistant immediately shut her mouth, grabbed the signed document, and fled the office. Sarah slammed her pen down on the desk, the smile on her lips slowly fading into a cold line as her eyes narrowed. I left Sarah's office building and realized it was almost noon, so I hailed a cab and headed home. After having lunch with my mom, I looked up a nearby driving school and called to ask about lessons. After all, having a garage full of sports cars that I could only look at was pure torture when I didn't know how to drive. The original Morrison had a license, so I just needed to learn the actual skill of driving. The driving school offered a private training course, which was perfect for me. I made an appointment and took a car over there immediately. True to the principle that money can make anything happen, the school's owner assigned me a private instructor, a beautiful woman with the patience of a saint. I have to say, you really get what you pay for. I felt hopelessly clumsy behind the wheel, but my instructor, Sienna, never once lost her cool with me. She spent the entire afternoon encouraging and reassuring me, providing top-tier emotional support. I spent the whole afternoon practicing, and I finally just barely started to get the hang of it. To thank my instructor, I invited her out to dinner. Meanwhile, just as Sarah was leaving her office, she received a message from Ashley. Ashley apologized for being out of line last time and suggested they treat Sarah to dinner tonight to make it up to her. 20 minutes later, Sarah walked into the restaurant Ashley had booked and immediately spotted a familiar figure. It was me, and I was laughing happily. Sarah approached quietly, just in time to hear me openly complimenting the woman sitting across from me. I told Sienna that with her looks and figure, she was wasting her talents as a driving instructor. Sienna smiled and explained that she wasn't actually an instructor, but the owner's daughter, roped into teaching me because they were short-staffed. I couldn't help but laugh at that, but as I was laughing, I felt a chilling gaze on me. I looked up and saw Sarah standing nearby with her face like an icy mask. Before I could even speak, she grabbed my arm and dragged me out of the restaurant. She hissed my name and reminded me that we weren't even divorced yet, accusing me of cavorting with other women. I looked at her, and she was so close I could see the pure fury in her eyes. I thought to myself that such a beautiful face was wasted on such a volatile temper. I rubbed my wrist and asked what other women she was talking about, insisting it was just a perfectly normal dinner. Sarah glared at me and asked if I took her for a fool. I didn't want to look at her, so I tilted my head back to look at the sky and told her that if she thought she was a fool, there was nothing I could do about it. Sarah let out a sharp, angry laugh and told me that things weren't like they were 2 years ago. She made it clear that from now on, she was the one in charge here. Knowing that touching me was like torture for her, I decided to press my advantage. I smiled, stepped closer, and boldly wrapped an arm around her slender waist. I asked her exactly what she had in mind. Sarah swallowed hard, her expression turning grim as she grabbed my wrist to pull my hand away. I knew she despised the original Morrison's touch, so I made sure that every time I made contact, her disgust would grow. Seeing her face darken, I raised my other hand and took hers, continuing my campaign to repulse her. I suggestively asked if we should get a room. Her summer dress was thin, and as my hand brushed against her leg, it seemed to send a jolt through her. Sarah's face flushed as she stared at me, because the old Morrison would never have been so audacious. I looked alluring to her, because my eyes held no love, yet my actions screamed that I craved her body, treating her almost like she was some common escort. Sarah swallowed again, her face growing even colder by the second. Since she still hadn't shoved me away in disgust, I leaned in as if I were going to kiss her. That finally did the trick. She pushed me away forcefully and immediately pulled out a handkerchief to wipe her hands. She told me to get rid of my delusions because I would never get what I wanted from her. And then it hit me, of course, the only reason she wouldn't grant me a divorce was that I was the one who wanted it. I rubbed my wrist and sneered, asking if she had ever considered the possibility that what I couldn't get from her, I could easily get from other women. I told her that I might crave her body, but to be honest, once the lights were off, all women were pretty much the same. She certainly wasn't my only option in this city. Sarah's face was as dark as ink as she clenched her jaw. She threw her handkerchief on the ground and let out a laugh that was pure rage, telling me to go right ahead and try. I smiled at her and noted that I was just about to do exactly that before she interrupted me. I told her that if she didn't have anything else to say, I was going back inside to continue my evening since my phone was still in there. Seeing that Sarah wasn't going to stop me, I headed back inside. But I had barely sat down when my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw that Sarah had sent me a video. I opened it, and my face went pale as I watched. The video contained evidence of the original Morrison hiring people to kidnap Julian, footage of me shoving someone into the street during a fight that caused an accident, and another clip of me hiring thugs to beat Julian up. This was more than enough evidence to land me in prison for years. She hadn't used it before because she had been wary of the Harrison family's power, but the fact that she was using it now meant she was no longer afraid. I had only had a few days of this good life, and I certainly didn't come to this world just to end up in a jail cell. Another message from Sarah popped up, giving me 2 minutes to get up to her suite. She was officially blackmailing me. As much as I hated giving in, I hated the idea of prison even more. Sienna noticed my pale face and poured me a glass of water, asking what was wrong. I just waved my hand dismissively. I apologized and told her that something had come up and I had to leave immediately. I quickly paid the bill and headed upstairs to Sarah's private suite. In the suite, Ashley had arrived just in time to see the confrontation between Sarah and me in front of the restaurant. She had snapped a photo and was already sharing it with her friends. From her angle, it looked like Sarah was passionately and dominantly making a move on me. They had all crowded by the window to watch me walk away without a backward glance, which only confirmed their theory that Sarah had forced herself on me. Ashley announced a new rule that nobody was to mention Morrison Harrison. When Sarah walked in the suite, Ashley greeted her immediately, and everyone started chatting and laughing while pointedly avoiding any mention of me. So when I pushed the door open and walked in, all 3 of her friends froze in surprise. Ashley, ever the quick thinker, immediately stood up and cleared the seat next to Sarah for me, setting out a new set of silverware. Ashley greeted me, and I smiled, waving to the group before shooting a look at Sarah and walking over to the empty seat. The 3 friends looked from me to Sarah and then proceeded to ignore me as usual. I gritted my teeth and leaned closer to Sarah, whispering to ask her what the meaning of this was. Sarah just smirked and told me she simply wanted me to be a little more obedient. My fists clenched as I wondered if this woman had any hobbies other than tormenting me. I forced a smile and picked up a piece of food for her, telling her that, of course, her wish was my command. I made a bold comment about warming her bed if she asked, and Sarah just shot me a look before setting down her empty wine glass. I immediately moved to refill it for her. After a whole afternoon of driving lessons, I was absolutely starving. Since Sarah wasn't making any more demands at the moment, I started to eat and genuinely enjoyed the food. After I finished my first bowl, I realized that everyone was staring at me in silence. I got myself a second bowl and gave them all a big smile, asking if anyone else wanted more and offering to get it for them. Her three friends looked even more shocked by my behavior. Morris and Harrison, the man who usually only had eyes for Sarah, was actually offering to serve them. A second later, Sarah finally spoke up, suggesting that since I loved being so helpful, I should peel the shrimp for her since they were her favorite. My fists clenched again in anger because I didn't even want to peel them for myself. I forced a smile, sat down, and looked at her, telling her, of course, my dear wife. I took the plate of shrimp and started peeling, my mind racing as I tried to figure a way out of this situation. I couldn't let her blackmail me forever. I was so lost in thought that I absent-mindedly popped a peeled shrimp into my own mouth. Sarah watched me eat the shrimp with a strange, unreadable expression in her eyes. As I continued to enjoy them, I felt a gaze so cold it could cut glass, which snapped me back to reality. I quickly took the next shrimp I had peeled and stuffed it directly into her mouth. I told her I had just been testing it for her to make sure it wasn't poisoned. Having been practically force-fed, Sarah began to chew instinctively, and the icy look in her eyes softened slightly. The old Sarah would have been disgusted if I had even put food on her plate, but now, after I fed her directly, she not only ate it but seemed to be enjoying it. Immediately, her friends started to hoot and tease us, asking us to consider the single people in the room before we got all lovey-dovey. I was fuming internally and couldn't stand their misplaced teasing. Nicole swirled the wine in her glass and looked at me, asking if I had ever considered finding someone else to dote on since Sarah was so hard to please. I popped another peeled shrimp into Sarah's mouth, putting on an adoring expression as if she were the only person in the world. My voice turned syrupy sweet as I admitted she might be hard to please, but she was just so beautiful. I told them I just loved how gorgeous and cool she was, not to mention her amazing body. Sarah watched me spout these lies with a pleasant smile on her face, but I knew that inwardly she was grinding her teeth to dust. A flicker of amusement appeared in her otherwise cold eyes. After dinner, as we were leaving the restaurant, I was planning on heading back to my parents' house, but Sarah tossed her car keys to me. She told me I was driving because she had been drinking, and since the original Morrison knew how to drive, I couldn't refuse. Seeing Sarah settle into the back seat, I steeled myself and got behind the wheel. Thank God I had taken that lesson this afternoon, but I was still a brand new driver and very nervous, especially driving at night. I focused completely on the road, driving at a literal crawl. Sarah leaned back in her seat, watching me drive her luxury car at the speed of a tractor. She let out an exasperated laugh and asked if I could possibly go any slower. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and my entire focus was on the road. I couldn't afford any distractions, so I snapped at her to stop talking to me. Sarah's face instantly darkened as she asked if I was forgetting my place. The next second, the car shot forward like an arrow because I panicked. I watched the speedometer climb while my mind went completely blank for a second. Sarah saw the sudden, reckless speed and noticed there was a car right in front of us that I wasn't slowing down for. It looked like I was trying to kill us both. Her face went taut with fear as she screamed at me, asking if I was crazy and telling me to hit the brakes. I yelled back that I was hitting them. It was only then that I realized I had mistaken the gas pedal for the brake. I slammed my foot on the correct pedal, but it was already too late. In the midst of the panic, I heard a loud crunch, and then the world went silent. When I came to, my neck and head were aching. I heard Sarah hiss my name through clenched teeth. I glanced back at her and argued that I was driving perfectly fine until she insisted on distracting me. Sarah stared at me with her face set in a cold mask, but before she could say more, I cut her off with a stream of dramatic apologies. I told her it was all my fault and that I was just pathetic. I claimed that the moment I heard her voice, I got so nervous that I couldn't even tell the brake from the gas. I said the words, but my face showed no actual remorse as I stepped out of the car. Sarah, her face still a mask of fury, called her assistant to come deal with the mess. When she hung up, she saw me rubbing my neck, leaning over to talk to the driver of the car we had hit. My posture was clearly apologetic. This version of me was a world away from the one in Sarah's memory. As the Morrison she remembered never apologized to anyone but her. He had been spoiled and arrogant, always acting superior even when he was clearly in the wrong. In a situation like this, the old Morrison wouldn't have even bothered to get out of the car. He would have just made a phone call and let someone else handle it without a single thought for the other driver. But here I was, rushing to check on her and asking if she was okay. The woman got out of her car, touching a bruise that was already forming on her forehead. When I got a clear look at her face, a massive wave of guilt washed over me. It was the famous young actress, Maya Brooks. The novel mentioned her as a former child star who had co-starred with Julian in his first big movie. The casting had been a huge deal for fans, but in that same year, just before the original Morrison's death, Maya Brooks had also died. She had left a long suicide note and taken her own life. Behind the sunny, smiling girl everyone saw on screen was a pair of parasitic, blood-sucking parents. They had clipped her wings and forced her to become a money-making machine with no regard for her own feelings or dreams. Suffering from long-term depression, the final straw came when her parents forced her to entertain a powerful industry mogul. In the end, Maya chose to take her own life. When I had read her story in the book, I felt like she was a reflection of my own past life, and I had actually cried for her. Maya glanced at her damaged car and then looked at me with a wry smile in her eyes. She remarked that this was what they meant by disaster striking out of the blue. I snapped back to the present, a pang of deep sympathy for her still in my eyes as I told her how sorry I was. I promised to cover all the repairs for her car, any medical bills, and compensation for her trouble. Most people's first reaction to seeing her was one of starstruck awe, but I was different. This was the first time anyone had ever looked at her with such open sympathy, as if they could see the unhappiness hidden beneath her glamorous facade. While she was still processing that, I pulled out my phone. I asked if I could get her contact information to make it easier to handle the compensation. Maya didn't really care about the money, but something about the look in my eyes made her take my phone and enter her number. She called her own phone to save my number and then handed it back to me. She asked if I recognized her, and I put my phone away with a smile, telling her that of course I recognized the famous Maya Brooks. I told her I was a huge fan and asked if I could get her autograph. Maya looked at me skeptically because when I first saw her, I hadn't shown any of the usual excitement of a fan meeting their idol. When she didn't move, I stepped forward and gave her a gentle hug. I told her that if she wouldn't give me an autograph, then a hug would have to do. Maya stood there stunned because it wasn't the excited, frantic hug of a typical fan. I just held her quietly, my gesture meant to be both a comfort and a silent confession. I told her she was truly amazing and that her work had given so many people the courage to face their own struggles. I said I hoped that one day we, her fans, could give her that same courage and be the strength that helped her move forward. Sarah watched from the car as I handled the accident and saw it somehow devolve into me seemingly flirting with the other driver. Her face darkened as she got out of the car, pulled me out of Maya's embrace, and snatched the keys from my hand just as her assistant arrived to drag me away. Maya stood there watching me go, my words still echoing in her mind. I turned and gave her a final wave, my smile as bright as a spring morning, creating a beautiful moment frozen in time under the warm street lights. Sarah's face was thunderous, and her voice was dripping with ice as she accused me of cheating right in front of her. She remarked that I was getting bolder and bolder. I leaned in close to her and told her that my fate was in her hands now. I said that if she didn't want me touching other women, I wouldn't have the nerve to do it, even if I wanted to. I told her my only thought was how to make her happy and made a show of leaning in even closer. As I expected, Sarah recoiled in disgust and coldly opened the car door to shove me inside. A few minutes down the road, I got a call from my mom asking why I wasn't home yet. I didn't want my parents to worry But now that the divorce was on hold and Sarah was blackmailing me, I knew I couldn't stay at their house every night. I had no choice but to lie to her, saying I wasn't coming home because Sarah had apologized and I had decided to give her another chance. From the driver's seat, Sarah snorted at me through the rearview mirror. My mom had expected this outcome, so she wasn't surprised, just a little disappointed. She told me that she and I should come over for dinner tomorrow instead. I glanced at Sarah while she was driving and reluctantly agreed. My mom told me to remember to tell her if anything was wrong and to get some rest. I murmured my agreement and told her, Dad, to get some sleep too and not to worry about me. The moment I hung up, Sarah's grating voice piped up, asking exactly what she was supposed to have apologized for. I just smiled and waved my hand dismissively, telling her it was just an excuse for my parents. I told her that she could never be in the wrong and that it was always my fault. I figured that acting miserable while still having to suck up to her would give her the sadistic pleasure she clearly craved. I knew that if she was satisfied, my life would be much easier. But Sarah decided to push her luck, reminding me how much I used to love writing those long essays on Facebook and telling me to write one tonight since I admitted I was wrong. She demanded at least 3,000 words. The original Morrison used to write them every day, and Sarah had muted his feed so she wouldn't have to see them. Now that I didn't love her and had deleted all those old posts, she was perversely forcing me to write them again. I had no choice but to smile and agree, promising to get right on it when we got home. The moment we arrived, I went straight to my room and sent a message to Elena. I asked her what the odds were of taking down Sterling Group or how much it would cost to acquire them. Sterling Group had become a local powerhouse in just a few years, so I was sure there had to be some skeletons in their closet. I refused to believe that I, a transmigrator with knowledge of the future, couldn't beat her at her own game. In the novel, Sarah had destroyed Harrison Holdings, so I was determined to destroy Sterling Group instead. I might not know much about business yet, but I could give the Harrison family a head start on all the next big money-making trends. Elena Video called me with a slight smile, asking if I really hated her that much now. A second later, realizing I wasn't at the Harrison estate, she frowned and noted that I was back at the house I had bought for Sarah. I didn't hide anything from her and told her all about Sarah blackmailing me with the videos. She asked what videos they were and told me to send them to her. I sent them over and then added nonchalantly that I assumed none of them knew about any of this. Elena was silent for a long time after that. It was clear she really hadn't known, and I realized Sarah must have cleaned up my messes privately just for the sake of her own company's image. Seeing my chance, I pressed on, explaining that she was now using it as leverage against me. I told her that was exactly why I had to take her down and get that leverage back. I remembered that Harrison Holdings had its own media division, so I asked her to have someone send me the files on all her signed artists. Elena looked confused and asked what I wanted them for. I just smiled and told her I had thought of a great new money-making project, but it was too much to explain over the phone, so I would tell her the details tomorrow. As a former office worker who wrote on the side, I had been looking into the short-form drama industry right before I died. Several series made for just a few $100,000 were pulling in millions a day in viewer payments in my old world. They were quick to produce, too, as you could film several in a single month. The only real requirements were a handsome male lead and a beautiful female lead to draw people in. In the age of viral short-form video, these dramas were a total goldmine. In this novel's world, TikTok was just starting to take off, but the short-form drama trend hadn't actually started yet. I knew that if I produced all the hit short dramas I had seen from my old world, no one would be able to catch up to us. After the call, I took a shower, and by the time I was done, the email with the artist files had already arrived. I opened the files on my laptop and saw that the company had recently signed a batch of new talent. I decided I would make some time to go to the agency and check them out in person. But first, I had to turn those hit shows into scripts. Determined to free myself from Sarah's blackmail as soon as possible, I got right to work on the writing. I wrote the outlines for 2 different series and then hammered out the first 20 episodes for each of them. By the time I was finished, it was past 5 in the morning, and I was completely exhausted. I encrypted the files, saved them, and collapsed into bed. When Sarah woke up, she saw there was no breakfast on the table, and the entire house was silent. She tried the handle on my bedroom door and found it was still locked. She knocked, and even though I was dead tired and pulled the covers over my head, it was no use because her knocking was relentless. Finally, I was jolted awake by pure irritation, so I stumbled to the door and opened it to ask what could possibly be so important at this hour. My hair was a total mess, and I couldn't stop yawning, which gave me a kind of lazy, disheveled charm. Sarah looked at me coldly and asked where breakfast was, which woke me up completely. She was actually banging on my door just for breakfast, and I thought to myself that I didn't run a diner. I stepped forward and wrapped her in a tight hug as my own petty form of revenge. I told her there was no breakfast and suggested she just have me instead. For a second, Sarah seemed dazed, but then her familiar reflexive nausea kicked in, and she shoved me away. She asked if I was sure about that in a voice laced with a threat, so I gritted my teeth and told her I would go make her something now. I hadn't set foot in the kitchen since I arrived in this world, and there was hardly any food in the fridge. I finally found a packet of noodles and a few eggs and managed to make a simple bowl for her. By the time I was finished, Sarah was already gone. I figured she had decided against eating, so I just ate the noodles myself, planning to head back to bed for a while. Just then, I received a message from Sarah telling me to bring the food to the office when it was ready. Of course, this woman really did have a talent for tormenting people. I gritted my teeth, changed my clothes, and grabbed my laptop. On my way out, I saw the black card she had left on a coffee table was still sitting there. I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket. I ended up just buying some takeout breakfast and dropping it off at Sterling Group. Sarah was in a meeting, so I just left the food on her desk and got out of there as fast as I could. From there, I drove to Harrison Holdings to find Elena and show her the scripts on my laptop. I told Elena I had 2 scripts, one about transmigration and one about rebirth, and asked her to take a look. Elena opened the files with a curious expression. After reading just the first few pages, she looked up at me with her face a total picture of disbelief. I pulled up a chair and waited until she had read a bit more before I spoke. I told her I was planning to produce them as short-form web dramas. I explained the entire concept to her and laid out the massive potential for the future. I pointed out that TikTok was just starting to blow up and already had over 100 million users. Elena watched me with a smile playing on her lips, her eyes shining as I spoke passionately about the business plan. Thinking about the script she had just read, for a fleeting moment, she wondered if the Morrison standing in front of her was actually a transmigrator himself. She felt that if I hadn't been replaced by another soul, I couldn't have possibly changed so drastically. I saw Elena staring at me in a daze and reached out to gently pinch her soft cheek. I had to admit, with skin and a face like that, even a saint would be tempted. I asked Elena what she thought about the project. Elena sat back and crossed her arms, suggesting that since this was my idea, I should be the one to take the lead on it. I nodded and told her that was no problem at all. I told her I would send over the full scripts so she could get them to a director to start prepping. I then mentioned I would head over to the talent agency later to cast the lead roles. I asked her if she could give them a heads up for me. Elena looked at me and asked if I wanted her to come along, but I waved her off and told her she already had enough on her plate. I promised to let her know if I ran into any problems. I was just about to leave when I remembered something and turned back to tell her one more thing. I wanted to sign Maya Brooks. Elena leaned back in her chair and looked at me with curiosity, asking why I had a sudden interest in her. I gave a vague explanation, telling her I just thought she was a rare talent. I told her that she was going to be a huge star, but her mother had always been her manager, and it didn't seem like they were looking to sign with an agency anytime soon. I told her to have the legal team draw up a contract and that I would handle the negotiations with her mother myself. Elena stared at my confident expression, looking momentarily stunned. I had just left the office and was on my way to the talent agency when I received a text from Sarah. She warned me that if lunch today was takeout again, I could expect to see myself in the headlines. I gritted my teeth, thinking that woman was truly dedicated to making my life miserable. I checked the time and then went to a luxury department store where I spent over $100,000 of her money on gifts for my parents. Then I headed back to their place to freeload a meal. My mom, seeing me return with a happy expression and gifts in hand, assumed that Sarah must be with me. She asked if I was here by myself, and I waved my hand, telling her that Sarah was too busy to come. My mom came over smiling and told me that just having me home was enough of a gift. She said I didn't have to buy them anything because they had everything they needed. Even though she said that, she held the designer bag I had bought her, turning it over and over with a massive smile on her face. She declared that all her other bags could be retired now because she loved this one so much. The staff chimed in with their own praise, telling her the bag was beautiful and went perfectly with her outfit. My mom stood up, holding the bag and admiring it in the mirror. She asked if they really thought so, proudly adding that her son had bought it for her. I was genuinely surprised to see her so happy. I had assumed that a woman who already had everything wouldn't care about one more gift. After lunch, I asked Mrs. Miller to pack up the leftovers for Sarah. When she heard they were for Sarah, her eyes nearly popped out of her head in surprise. She asked me if it was really appropriate to give Miss Sterling leftovers and offered to cook something fresh for her instead. I waved my hand and told her no, this was perfectly fine. Mrs. Miller kept glancing at me as she packed the food. In the past, whenever I brought food for Sarah, I would meticulously pick out only the very best dishes for her. By the time I arrived at Sterling Group, it was almost 1 o'clock. I spotted Sarah's assistant in the lobby and shoved the thermal container into her hands. I told her it was for her boss. After Sarah had checked the time for the 5th time, her office door finally opened. She looked up instinctively and saw her assistant walk in, holding the thermal container with a smile. The assistant mentioned that Morrison had started bringing her lunch again. Sarah's face grew a shade colder as she asked where I was, and the assistant gestured vaguely, telling her that I had already left. The assistant had been eating takeout for days and had actually started to miss my cooking. Seeing that Sarah had no more questions, she picked up the container, ready to take it out, and enjoyed herself as usual. She told Miss Sterling she would be on her way if there was nothing else, but she was stopped by Sarah's cold voice asking exactly where she was taking that food. The assistant looked at her with confusion, pointing out that she never usually ate the food Morrison brought. Feeling the dangerous, icy aura emanating from her boss, she immediately shut her mouth, placed the container on the desk, and told her to enjoy her meal before scurrying back to work. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the container for a moment before picking up her phone. I had just gotten back into my car and finished a call with the director of the talent agency when my phone rang. It was Sarah, demanding that I get her a coffee from the place on Lexington Avenue and deliver it to her personally. I gritted my teeth and asked if her assistant was dead, wondering why I had to run such a petty errand. Sarah replied that it would be a waste of her assistant's talents, whereas I was perfectly suited for the job. I thanked her sarcastically for letting me know I was still useful for something. I hung up and went to the talent agency anyway. The director led me into a room filled with aspiring actors. I scanned the lineup and then walked over to a group of young women. I reached out and touched the cheek of the girl on the far left, then gave her arm a light squeeze. I told her that her arms were a little soft and she would need to tone up. The girl's face immediately flushed with embarrassment. I turned to the girl next to her, tilting her chin from side to side to examine her jawline, then pinch her waist and told her she would need to lose some weight. The girl couldn't help but ask if their figures really mattered that much for acting. I gave her a look and told her that depended entirely on the kind of role she wanted to play. I told her that if she was happy being an extra, then it didn't matter, but if she wanted to be the lead in a romance, then looks and figure were everything. I was honestly disappointed because the gap between their headshots and reality was significant. Either their faces weren't quite right, or their figures just weren't up to par. These short-form dramas were cheap productions with laughably low pay, so no established actor would touch them. That meant the newcomers had to carry the show with their looks alone. If they weren't attractive enough for me, a male viewer, to find them appealing, then how could we expect the audience to be satisfied? The leads had to be absolutely gorgeous. After I had assessed everyone, I finally explained my purpose for being there. I told them I was planning to produce a few short-form web dramas. I clarified that we weren't talking about traditional hour-long episodes, but short, viral-style content for platforms like TikTok. I was in the middle of my pitch when another message from Sarah came through. She asked if I had gone to another country to get the coffee since I was taking so long. I quickly replied that I was stuck in traffic and to give me another half hour. I locked my phone and continued with my presentation. I explained that the shooting schedule for each series would only be about 7 to 12 days. The pay ranged from a few hundred to several $1,000s a day, depending on the role. I told them that anyone interested in getting some on-camera experience could sign up with the director. With Sarah's threat hanging over my head, I wrapped things up quickly and left the agency. By the time I arrived at her office building, the delivery guy was already waiting outside. I tipped him, grabbed the coffee, and rushed upstairs. The moment I pushed open her office door, Sarah's icy gaze shot toward me instantly. I ignored her look, walked over, and handed her the coffee with an apologetic smile. I told her I was so sorry for keeping her waiting. My forehead was beaded with sweat, and I was slightly out of breath as if I had run all the way up there. Sarah glanced at the coffee on her desk and asked if I had poisoned it. The next second, I picked it up and took a sip, my smile still fixed on my face even though it didn't quite reach my eyes. I asked my dear wife if she was satisfied now. Sarah's expression grew even colder as she looked from me to the coffee I had just sipped from. I rounded the desk and moved toward her, putting on a fawning expression. I asked if there was anything else I could do for her, offering kisses or hugs. Sarah immediately rolled her chair backward to put distance between us while staring at me coldly. I watched her treat me like I was some kind of monster, but before I could even savor the victory, she spoke again. She told me she had invited friends over for dinner tonight and ordered me to go home and prepare it. I gritted my teeth, forcing my anger down and keeping a servile smile plastered on my face. I asked her, of course, inquiring how many friends were coming and whether I should prepare a specific cuisine. Sarah waved her hand dismissively, saying there would be 5 or 6 of them and telling me to figure the rest out. I nodded and told her yes, of course. I would go home and start preparing right away. The moment I turned my back, the smile vanished from my face. This woman was relentless. I knew I couldn't let her spend all her time tormenting me like this. I had to create a distraction, something to make her focus her attention on her beloved male lead instead. After I left, Sarah casually picked up the coffee and took a sip. A moment later, she realized it was the same cup I had drunk from. Her expression turned stormy, and she immediately pushed the cup to the far side of her desk, not touching it again. That evening, when Sarah got home, she was greeted by the sound of upbeat music coming from the living room. I was nowhere in sight, but the delicious aroma of food wafted from the kitchen. She walked to the kitchen doorway and saw 2 beautiful women she didn't recognize doing the cooking. One of them was actually feeding me a bite of a freshly prepared dish. I exclaimed that the food was delicious and told the woman she was so beautiful and had such a great figure that she didn't look like a chef at all. I joked that I thought I'd been scammed, but she clearly had real talent. The woman smiled and asked what I thought she did for a living. I smiled back and told her that with her looks, it would be a crime if she weren't a model. While we were chatting, I felt a prickling, cold sensation on the back of my neck. I turned around and saw Sarah standing there with a face so icy she looked like I owed her $1 billion. The moment I walked over, Sarah sneered at me, reminding me that she had told me to cook dinner and accusing me of bringing home 2 women to enjoy myself instead. She asked sarcastically if she should call a few more for me. Just as she reached for her phone, I grabbed her hand and asked what she was talking about, reminding her that my cooking was terrible. I told her I was afraid I would embarrass her in front of her friends, so I hired a pair of professional chefs instead. I pointed out that if I were really trying to cheat, I wouldn't be stupid enough to bring them to our house. Just then, the doorbell rang, and Sarah shot me a warning look before pulling her hand away. At the same time, her phone rang, and as she pulled it out, I caught a glimpse of the screen. It was Julian calling. I couldn't help but strain to listen. It turned out Julian had gotten home to find a delivery waiting for him. It was a bouquet of flowers and a mysterious package. When he opened it, he found a collar and a card that read, "My dearest Julian, I love you and dream of you every night. I want to see you so badly." The card claimed it was a gift chosen especially for him, and that he would look charming wearing it. Julian was instantly creeped out, feeling like he was being watched, which made his skin crawl. When he called Sarah, His voice was trembling as he asked if she could come over because he had a problem. Sarah answered the phone with a puzzled look on her face. He told her he thought he had a stalker. Hearing those words, I almost burst out laughing and had to bite my lip to keep it in. Seeing Sarah hang up, I hurried to help bring the food to the table. This was the first time in their entire 2-year marriage that Sarah had ever invited friends over. That, combined with our recent public display of affection, naturally led her friends to believe we had finally worked things out. The moment they walked in, they started showering her with gifts. Ashley pressed a gift card for a $5,000 hotel suite into Sarah's hand, telling her it was just a little something to show she cared. Nicole held up a mysterious gift bag, mentioning they were a few things her friends had recommended. Sarah looked at the gifts, each more ridiculous than the last, and announced with a stony face that she had to step out for a bit. I was just bringing out another dish when I heard she was leaving. I immediately put on my most understanding and supportive face and told her that if she had something to do, she should go. I told her I would take good care of her friends as I placed the dish in Ashley's hands. I deftly took the gift bag from her and told Sarah not to let us keep her. Sarah saw how eager I was to get rid of her, then glanced at the room full of women and grabbed my wrist, telling me I was coming with her. Her friends were stunned that she was taking Morrison with her to run an errand, wondering if we were really that inseparable now. I just frowned at her in frustration. I argued that she had business to attend to, and it wasn't right for me to tag along, especially since we had guests and I couldn't just abandon them. I had to refuse because I'd spent my own time and money to create this fake stalker, all to push Sarah and Julian closer together. If I went along, how were they supposed to have their romantic bonding moment? Sarah tossed a quick remark to her friends to make themselves at home as she dragged me out the door. She moved so fast, I didn't even have time to put down the gift bag, and it wasn't until I was shoved into the car that I realized it was full of lingerie and other adult items. Even I, with my thick skin, couldn't help but blush. I immediately shoved the bag at her, thinking she could definitely use this stuff tonight, which was all the more reason for me not to go with her. I looked at Sarah and suggested calmly that if we both left, her friends might trash the house, so I should stay and play host while she went to take care of her business. Sarah gave me a look that said she saw right through me, then tossed the bag into the back seat and started the car. My voice was laced with exasperation as I pointed out that I didn't even have my phone, but it was like she couldn't even hear me. Soon, we were pulling up to Julian's apartment building. I had planned on waiting in the car while she handled it, but she took the keys with her when she got out. I watched her disappear inside without a backward glance, but my curiosity eventually got the better of me. I followed her and peeked in from the hallway. Julian was pacing anxiously inside, and when he saw Sarah, he rushed to her like she was his savior, showing her the card and explaining everything that had happened. He explained that for a while now, anonymous packages had been arriving addressed only to him. Sarah checked the security footage and then made a call. She asked someone to trace the delivery driver's license plate. She hung up and turned to Julian, telling him that until they figured this out, he shouldn't stay there alone. I watched them having this dry, lifeless conversation with zero physical contact, and I felt my frustration mounting. I just wanted them to stop holding back already. I thought to myself that they made the Stoics of ancient Greece look impulsive. I had been idly fiddling with a potted plant in the hallway, just tracing its leaves. But seeing my plan have absolutely no effect was making me so anxious that by the time I snapped out of it, I had accidentally ripped the entire plan out by its roots. To Julian, who happened to walk out just then, it looked like I had gotten the wrong idea and was now furious. He flinched and immediately started to explain himself. He told me it wasn't what I thought between him and Sarah. Seeing his reaction, I quickly put the mangled plant down and plastered on an embarrassed, harmless smile. I apologized, saying I was just bored while waiting and must have gotten a little carried away. I promised to buy him a new one tomorrow. Sarah gave me an unreadable look while Julian just waved his hands frantically, saying it was fine and just a plant. Not want to be a third wheel, I sped up and walked ahead of them. Julian was still completely confused, asking Sarah if she thought I had misunderstood and if I was angry. Sarah watched me walk away and shook her head, telling him not to worry about me. I hurried back to the car and got in the back seat, leaving the front passenger seat open for Julian. He thought it would be inappropriate and started to get in the back with me, but I waved him off. He sat uneasily in the front, looking like he wanted to explain something, but when he saw me close my eyes and feign sleep, he finally gave up. He glanced nervously at Sarah and saw her shoot me a look in the rearview mirror. Sarah started the car and glanced at Julian, asking if he had eaten yet. Julian shook his head and said not yet. After that brief exchange, the car fell into an awkward silence. I tried to nudge them along several times, but there was no further interaction between them. I wished I could turn invisible and physically push their heads together for a kiss. Meanwhile, back at the house, Ashley was gossiping with the others. Ashley asked the others what they thought about Sarah ditching them for some errand and taking Morrison with her. Nicole just laughed at the situation. Nicole joked that maybe Sarah was afraid they were going to steal her husband. Madison waved her hand dismissively and said she didn't think we were coming back tonight. Ashley pouted, saying she had already given Sarah a gift and didn't see why they should leave. She declared she wasn't leaving and was actually going to eat everything in the house. Ashley had just pulled the most expensive bottle of dessert wine from the wine cabinet and was about to open it in celebration when I stormed back in with a thunderous look on my face. I was followed closely by Sarah and Julian, and the three friends were completely baffled. I downed a large glass of water, trying to quell the fire of my frustration. I had even gone to the trouble of using cash from my own account to create the fake stalker just so Sarah couldn't trace it. And after all that effort, those two had made absolutely zero progress. I finished my water, still fuming, when I saw the open bottle of wine and an idea struck me. I decided it was time for a little alcohol-fueled chaos. Julian's first instinct in a crisis was to call Sarah, and the moment he called, she had dropped everything, including her friends, to rush to his side. If that wasn't mutual affection, I didn't know what was. I was convinced the only reason she wouldn't divorce me was to torture me. That woman's thirst for revenge was just too strong. For the sake of my future single life, I put on a wide smile and turned to Ashley and the others. I told them it was great they had started and that I would go grab a couple more bottles because no one was going home sober tonight. The three of them stared, baffled, as I cheerfully went to the wine cabinet. Ashley looked completely confused and asked if Sarah had really just taken her husband to go pick up her first love. Madison smirked and suggested that maybe she had decided she wanted to have her cake and eat it too. By the time Sarah and Julian came to the table, I had returned with 2 more bottles of dessert wine. I took a seat at the far end, leaving 2 empty chairs side by side for them. Sarah sat down, and Julian took the seat next to her, greeting her friends a little awkwardly. Ashley politely told Mr. Thorne that they had heard so much about him, and it was an honor to finally meet him. I immediately jumped in and suggested that she should at least offer him a toast. Sarah shot me a look, her expression completely unreadable. Everyone else turned to stare at me too, but I just looked back at them with an expression of pure innocence, asking if I had said something wrong. I asked why she shouldn't toast him. Ashley smiled and raised her glass to the famous Mr. Thorne. It was Julian's first time meeting Sarah's friends, so he felt he couldn't refuse. He politely touched his glass to hers and took a sip. I immediately grabbed the bottle and jumped up with an enthusiastic smile to refill his glass. Julian quickly waved his hand and told me it was fine and he could get it himself. I just smiled and topped off his glass anyway, telling him he was Sarah's honored guest and I couldn't possibly let him serve himself. Sarah toyed with her wine glass, giving me a cool, unreadable glance. Her friends were completely baffled, but were trying their best to follow along with the strange vibe. After pouring the wine, I turned to Nicole, who was sitting next to Ashley, and asked if she wasn't going to toast our famous guest. Nicole just smirked, raised her glass, and said she would never be so rude. As Nicole went to toast Julian, Sarah shot her a cold look and told her that if she wanted a drink, she should drink it herself. Then she turned to Julian and told him he didn't have to indulge them. Julian insisted it was fine and raised his glass anyway, saying he could drink. Madison immediately followed suit, raising her glass as well and saying she would toast the big star too. And so, Julian ended up downing several glasses in a row. I returned to my seat and encouraged everyone to eat, my mind already scheming how to get Sarah to drink as well. Before I could come up with a plan, Sarah herself spoke up, looking coldly at her three friends. She asked if it was polite to only toast him and not their host. The implication was that they should toast me next, which was a clear attempt to get back at them on Julian's behalf. Nicole just laughed, swirling the wine in her glass, and noted that he was the guest of honor, so it was only right they toasted him first. She pointed out that Sarah was the one who invited them, but hadn't toasted them yet, asking if she was saying they should toast the host before the host toasted them. She asked who was really being rude here. I honestly wanted to give her a high five for that. I glanced over at Julian and saw his expression had soured, as he was clearly feeling jealous. I immediately stepped in to defuse the tension by refilling Julian's glass and then my own. I told everyone that my wife and I would like to propose a toast to the whole group. Sarah shot me a cold look, and I gave her a meaningful glance back. When she didn't move, I squeezed her leg under the table to get her attention. Sarah's face darkened instantly, but she coldly picked up her glass and drank. Even though she could hold her liquor well, once I saw her drink, I stopped paying attention to the social games and focused on eating. I made sure to avoid the crab and lobster or anything else that required extra work to eat, so she wouldn't have an excuse to order me around. Sarah watched me eat with obvious displeasure, shooting me looks that could kill from across the table. The next time she glared at me, I pretended to misunderstand her and asked if she wanted some. I picked up a piece of braised pork and stuffed it right in her mouth. The next second, I saw the expression on the face of the woman who was so repulsed by my touch turn even fouler. I can't even begin to describe how satisfying that moment was for me. I glanced over at Julian and saw him down another glass of wine. After dinner, Ashley and the others wanted to stay for karaoke, but Sarah unceremoniously kicked them out. I wanted to escape too, so I glanced at my phone and made an excuse. I told them my mom had just texted about an emergency at home, and I needed to call and see what was going on. I pretended to be on the phone as I headed for the door, leaving the living room to Sarah and Julian. But before I could make my escape, I heard Sarah's cold voice telling me I had 5 minutes. She warned me that if she didn't see me in 5 minutes, it would be the last good day I ever had. I gritted my teeth in frustration, wondering why she wasn't paying attention to her man and why she was so obsessed with me. Beside her, Julian was looking at her with a dizzy expression, clearly drunk. Sarah glanced at her watch and then looked at Julian, telling him she would call his assistant to come get him. She pulled out her phone, but as she was looking for the number, Julian suddenly stood up and knocked the phone from her hand. He asked Sarah if he could stay there for the night. Sarah put some distance between them and told him coldly that she would have her assistant stay with him instead. Julian shook his head and said he didn't want the assistant. He wanted her. Sarah's elegant brows furrowed even more deeply at his words. Julian reached out and grabbed the fabric of her dress at her waist, asking if she had started to fall for Morrison. He asked what he was supposed to do if she fell for him, since he had waited for her for so many years. Outside, I took a call from the director of the talent agency. He told me that out of the 10 actors I had seen, only 3 had signed up for the project, 2 men and 1 woman. I was a little surprised and wondered if newcomers were really this picky. It didn't really matter because I had approached them first as our own talent, wanting to give them the first shot at a breakout role. I got the contact information for the 3 who were interested and turned back to peek inside. I saw that the 2 of them were now in close physical contact, and from that distance, since Julian was still clutching her dress, I assumed they were kissing. I wondered if he was about to carry her to the bedroom, thinking alcohol really was a wonderful thing for romance. A smile spread across my face, though it was a shame I was too far away to hear anything. I was watching with great interest when Sarah suddenly whipped her head around and looked right at me, which startled me. She asked if I had seen enough and told me to get over there. I was speechless, wondering if she had eyes in the back of her head and what she could possibly want me for. I walked over reluctantly and saw her face was blank. I gritted my teeth, forced a smile, and picked up her phone from the floor. The next second, she shoved the drunken Julian into my arms and told me he was sleeping with me tonight. Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I asked her if she was really letting him sleep with me, and if she wasn't afraid I would murder him in his sleep. Sarah turned and walked upstairs without a backward glance, telling me that if he died, I would die with him. I gritted my teeth as I watched her go, asking why she didn't just let him sleep with her so that all three of us could live to see another day. Only then did she stop and turn to look back at me, her eyes sharp enough to tear me to shreds. I was genuinely confused for a second because I thought I was being generous by letting them sleep together, and I didn't understand why she wasn't happy. Sarah slammed her bedroom door shut, leaving me with no choice but to haul Julian back to my own room. He clung to me and wouldn't let go, clearly mistaking me for Sarah in his drunken state. He murmured her name and told her he loved her. I recorded his drunken confession and sent it to Sarah, hoping to add more fuel to their romantic fire. It backfired spectacularly as she replied by asking if I had that much free time on my hands. She asked if I had written today's Facebook essay yet, and noted that since I was so good at complimenting women, 500 words on the topic should be no problem for me. I gritted my teeth and copied a template for praising a woman's beauty from a romance novel, then added some extra cringy lines about craving her body just to disgust her. I wrote that her face was a masterpiece sculpted by angels and so perfect it made the heavens weep with jealousy. I added that the Pacific Ocean was just a puddle compared to the drool I had shed for her and begged her to stop stealing my very soul. I sent the message and angrily shut off my phone, only to see Julian's fair, delicate face leaning in toward mine. I glanced at him and had to admit he really was a star for a reason. His face was prettier than most women's, and his skin was so flawless and dewy it looked unreal. Julian murmured with hazy eyes as he looked at me, telling me he had loved me since the first moment he saw me. With that, he puckered his lips and leaned in for a kiss. I yelled at him to stop, and just as I was trying to fend him off, the door to Sarah's room opened and she stepped out onto the landing. She started to ask me something but froze mid-sentence, staring down at the two of us. I was out the door first thing the next morning to avoid any more awkwardness. There was still a year before the all-out business war between Sterling Group and Harrison Holdings described in the novel. In that time, I had to make our company strong enough to withstand her eventual attack. I decided to start with the media division, and my first move would be to sign the popular young actress, Maya Brooks. In a private room at an elegant tea house, I reviewed the contract proposal for Maya that the agency director had given me. I remembered her story from a novel. She was a former child star and a constant presence on the big screen from a young age. But behind that sunny, smiling facade was a pair of parasitic parents. They had crushed her dreams, turning her into a money-making machine with no regard for her feelings, which led to a long battle with depression. The final straw was when they forced her to entertain a powerful industry mogul, after which she took her own life. Reading her story, I felt like she was a reflection of my own past life, and I had actually cried for her. I had called and arranged a meeting with her mother for that morning. An hour later, Maya's mother, Diana Brooks, finally arrived. When Diana Brooks saw it was me, a look of instant disdain crossed her face. She was clearly thinking about why the Harrison family's supposedly useless heir was the one meeting her. She asked where Director Miller was, and I gave her a cold look, thinking of everything she had put her daughter through. I didn't bother with pleasantries and simply tossed the contract on the table in front of her. I told her Director Miller was busy and had sent me to talk to her instead. Diana Brooks let out a short, derisive laugh and asked what I could possibly know about this business. Despite her words, she picked up the contract. Her daughter's latest movie was poised to be a huge hit, and this was the perfect time to leverage that into a more lucrative deal. When she saw it wasn't a script offer but an exclusive agency contract, she tossed it back on the table and looked at me like I was an idiot. She asked if I had brought the wrong file. She mentioned that Director Miller had said on the phone that we had a new project for them. I leaned back on the sofa and looked at her calmly, telling her frankly that we weren't here to offer a role but to sign Maya. Diana immediately grabbed her purse and stood up, saying she was afraid I was going to be disappointed. I calmly dropped the bomb and told her that her daughter had severe clinical depression. I continued in a slow, deliberate tone, pointing out that Hollywood was full of actresses and her daughter was just starting to make a name for herself. I asked her if she thought any studio would be willing to risk insuring her for a major film if that little secret got out. Diana's face went white as she stared at me and asked how I knew that. I rested my arm on the back of the sofa and told her coolly that I knew because I had seen how her story ended, and I knew a lot more than that. I told her that I knew she and her husband were gambling addicts, and that whenever they were out of money, they forced their daughter to take jobs or entertain clients with no regard for her mental health. I asked her what she thought her adoring fans would do if all of that were to leak online. That 1,000-word suicide note from the book, with its itemized list of abuses, was now my leverage against her. I watched her calmly as her composure crumbled, her legs seeming to give way beneath her. She asked if Maya had told me all of this. I snorted and asked her if she thought Maya would have waited this long if she were willing to tell anyone. A dark anger rose in me, as if I were seeing that desperate girl before her death all over again. I gritted my teeth and told her there were no secrets that stayed hidden forever and that I had done my homework because I wanted to sign her. I noted that Maya still thought of her as a mother and didn't want her to become a pariah, even while she hid her self-harm on her thighs where no one could see. I told her to think carefully about whether she wanted to be a social outcast and have her daughter blacklisted, or if she wanted to keep making money off her. With that, I stood up and took 2 steps toward the door before stopping and turning back with a sarcastic smile. I told her I was just curious how she could watch her daughter suffer so much and still have the heart to keep exploiting her. I asked if she had carried her for 9 months out of love, or if she was just incubating a future cash machine. I had wanted to ask my own parents that same question, but I never got the chance. Diana just kept her head down in silence. I thought of all the years I'd been beaten, berated, and exploited, and as I walked out of the room, my own emotions overwhelmed me, and my eyes grew red. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, tilting my head back and trying to compose myself. At that moment, Sarah emerged from a nearby private room, having just finished a meeting. She saw me leaning there alone, looking utterly dejected. The person with her noticed her pause and asked if something was wrong. Sarah composed herself and said a few quiet words to her associate, but when she turned to look at me again, I was already gone. Sarah had security pull the surveillance footage, and once she was back at her office, she called in her assistant. She told her assistant to find out what Morrison Harrison and Diana Brooks had talked about today. Half an hour later, the assistant called back and said I had been there to discuss signing Maya Brooks to an exclusive contract. Hearing this, Sarah was lost in thought, wondering when I had started getting involved in the family business. She remembered the incident with the car accident and the actress. She assumed I was upset because I had failed to sign her. Sarah tossed her phone aside and told her assistant to sign Maya Brooks to their own company instead. The assistant nodded and promised to get right on it. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed with new notifications, and she picked it up to look. There were new charges for $18,000 and $5,500. Sarah sneered, thinking I was spending her money while pining over another woman. Her finger traced the cold glass of the screen, a vicious glint appearing in her eye. She had never considered me her equal, but this feeling of losing control, coupled with my willingness to spend a fortune on another woman, deeply wounded her pride. As someone who had always gotten her way, she decided that if I wanted to play, we would play for much higher stakes. Sarah called her assistant, her voice completely devoid of any warmth. She told them she didn't care what it took and to outbid us and promise her the world just to get Maya Brooks's contract. She also ordered them to activate the contingency plan and have their partners squeeze the funding on our new projects. She wanted to see exactly how I planned to play the part of a playboy once I was completely broke. She hung up the phone and leaned back in her office chair with a cruel smile playing on her lips as she envisioned my downfall. She was determined to make me understand that everything I possessed, from the woman I wanted to champion to the career I was trying to build, was firmly in the palm of her hand. She felt she could crush my entire world whenever she pleased. However, the panic Sarah anticipated never actually arrived. A few days later, a short-form web drama titled The Heiress Rebirth went viral across every major social media platform. The plot moved at lightning speed and was packed with addictive twists and incredibly satisfying moments of revenge. The lead actress was an unknown newcomer we had recently signed to Harrison Holdings. Despite being made on a shoestring budget of just a few $100,000, the series generated over $10 million in revenue in a single week. It completely disrupted the entertainment market. Inside the Harrison Holdings boardroom, Elena stared at the staggering numbers on the financial report with her eyes wide, with a mixture of disbelief and pure admiration. She turned to look at me, finding me perfectly calm and composed at her side. She admitted that she never imagined my web drama project could be this successful so quickly. I simply smiled and pushed a thick file across the table to her, telling her that this was just the beginning and that our cash flow was officially back. I told her that now we could finally go after the big fish. That big fish was the contract for Maya Brooks. Sarah's attempt to poach the actress came quickly, just as I had predicted it would. Diana Brooks called me, evasively mentioning that they had received a much better offer and trying to back out of her deal. I didn't bother arguing with her mother, and instead I used the personal contact information I had to reach out to Maya directly. We met at a quiet, secluded cafe where she arrived wearing a mask and a hat while looking extremely nervous. I didn't start the meeting by offering her a massive, multi-million-dollar contract like Sarah's team undoubtedly had. I simply placed a detailed career roadmap and a comprehensive psychological rehabilitation program on the table in front of her. I told her that while Sarah could offer her money, she could never give her the chance at a brand new life. I told her that I knew exactly what she was going through and that I knew her immense talent shouldn't be wasted. I asked her to work with me. I promised that I wouldn't just make her a top-tier actress, but I would help her become a free and happy Maya Brooks. I promised her that we would put together the best legal team in the country to help her break free from the shackles of her parasitic family. Maya's body trembled slightly as she looked at me, and I could see the weariness and confusion in her eyes slowly being replaced by a glimmer of hope. After a long moment of silence, she took off her mask and gave me a genuine smile while telling me that she believed in me. The very next day, Maya Brooks's official account announced that she had signed an exclusive contract with Starlight Studios, the new entertainment division of Harrison Holdings. The news served as a resounding slap in the face to Sarah. Not only had she failed to poach Maya, but she had inadvertently become a mere stepping stone on my path to success. But then the real storm hit as the financial attack Sarah had planned was officially launched. News had already spread that Harrison Holdings was pursuing several large-scale projects simultaneously. To any outsider, it looked like an incredibly reckless and risky expansion for a company of our size. Cutting off our funding at such a critical moment was supposed to be like pulling the rug out from under us. The Harrison Holdings shareholders were in a state of total panic, while Sarah calmly waited for our family to come crawling to her to beg for mercy. But during the emergency board meeting, Elena and I remained perfectly composed. I addressed the board, telling the esteemed members that there was absolutely no need to panic. I spoke while turning on the projector, which displayed the clear, upward profit curve of our web drama division and our substantial cash reserves. I explained that we never actually intended to launch all those projects at once, and that the entire expansion had just been a smokescreen. Elena continued the presentation, her voice sounding clear and strong. She explained that while we had Sterling Group's attention focused on our supposed expansion, we had used the profits from the web dramas to quietly complete the acquisition of Core Source Technologies. She added that Core Source happened to hold the core patents for Sarah's most important new energy project of the year. The entire room erupted in cheers at the news. Sarah's trap hadn't just failed to crush us. We had used it as cover to deliver a fatal blow to her company. The lifeline of her flagship project was now firmly in our grasp. When the news finally reached Sarah, she crushed the glass she was holding in her hand, not even noticing the blood that began to trickle from her fingers. She had lost in the world of business. She had been utterly and completely defeated. Humiliated and enraged, she finally decided to play her very last card against me. My phone lit up with the video file she had sent, the evidence of the original Morrison's crimes that she believed could ruin me once and for all. The accompanying text was cold and vicious, demanding that I terminate the acquisition of Core Source, transfer Maya Brooks's contract to her, and then come crawling back to her to apologize. She threatened that otherwise, those videos would be on everyone's phone by tomorrow morning. I looked at the message with a completely calm heart. I had been waiting for this day. I arranged to meet Sarah in her office, where she assumed I was there to surrender, and her face wore the arrogant smirk of a victor. She asked me if I had made my decision, but I didn't answer her directly, merely gesturing to Elena, who was standing right behind me. Elena placed a folder on the desk and slid it across the surface toward Sarah. She told her that before she decided to burn everything to the ground, she might want to take a look at the documents inside. Sarah opened the folder with a confused expression, and her face instantly went white. Inside were detailed depositions from the other individuals who had been involved in the incidents captured in the videos. They all testified that the original Morrison's mental state at the time had been extremely unstable and that he had been maliciously provoked into acting out. More importantly, the folder also contained a professional analysis from a top psychiatrist, diagnosing the original Morrison with paranoid behaviors resulting from long-term psychological and emotional abuse. Elena's voice was calm and sharp as she explained that this evidence was sufficient to prove that my actions were pathological in nature, which would earn me maximum legal sympathy. She told Sarah that despite knowing about my unstable mental state, she had subjected me to prolonged emotional abuse, held those videos for 2 years, and was now using them for commercial extortion. She warned her that her actions constituted a serious felony and asked her who she thought would be the first to fall if we went to the police. Sarah swayed on her feet, staring at me in absolute disbelief. The man who had once been her obedient puppet, completely at her mercy, had become a strange and terrifying figure who was always one step ahead of her. Her blackmail attempt had become a complete joke, and just as she was reeling from the shock, her phone began to ring. It was Julian. He had seen the news about the Core Source acquisition and had heard whispers in the industry about the ruthless tactics Sarah had been using. His voice on the phone was filled with a sense of disappointment and a cold distance she had never heard from him before. He told her that he always thought she was just a proud woman, but he never expected this from her, suggesting it was best if they just went back to being friends. The halo around her first love shattered completely, and Sarah realized she had lost all of her leverage. She looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes showed a flicker of genuine regret and vulnerability. She whispered my name and asked if we could go back to the way things were before. I shook my head, my gaze remaining calm and steady. I told her that she didn't actually miss me. She just missed having a shadow she could control. I told her that the only thing left between us now was the finalized divorce agreement. A month later, Harrison Holdings held a grand gala to celebrate its successful initial public offering. As the company's new chief strategy officer, I stood in the spotlight giving my keynote speech. After thanking my parents and my team, my gaze finally settled on Elena, who was watching me from the audience with a proud smile. I announced that there was one more person I needed to thank before stepping down from the stage. Under the watchful eyes of everyone in the room, I walked directly to her and took her hand in mine. I told everyone that when I was at my lowest point, she had believed in me without question. I explained that while I was drawing up the blueprints for our future, she was the one who filled in all the essential details. I declared that she was my most trusted partner and the person I wanted to protect most in this world. I looked at her and said, "Elena, thank you." Elena's eyes welled with tears, and under the spotlights, they shone brighter than any star in the sky. I said nothing more, simply lowering my head. Amidst a flurry of camera flashes and the audible gasps and cheers of the guests, I gently but firmly kissed her. Across the city, in a vast, cold, and empty office, Sarah watched the scene unfold on a live stream on her phone. As our lips met, she could almost hear the sound of her own heart breaking. She silently turned off the screen, plunging herself into total darkness. A single silent tear traced a path down her cheek, reflecting the glittering lights of the city far below. It was a city where not a single light now shone for her. I had learned that the best revenge isn't ruining someone who never valued you. It's building a life so full that you completely forget they ever had a say in your worth.